it was all going just fine, sort of. In April this year, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg met with President Obama in the Oval Office, marking the 67th anniversary of the NATO alliance. President Obama said NATO continues to be the
linchpin, the cornerstone of our collective defense and U.S. security policy.
Well, I just had the opportunity to have an excellent conversation with President-elect Trump.
Then the climate changed, and suddenly Stoltenberg was speaking by phone with US President-elect Donald Trump.
My agenda will be based on a simple core principle: putting America first.
Trump, the candidate, questioned the point of NATO and its freeloading European members. But Trump, the President-elect, and Secretary General Stoltenberg both underlined NATO's enduring importance and discussed how NATO is adapting to the new security environment, including to counter the threat of terrorism. The two leaders agreed that progress has been made on fairer burden sharing, but there's more to do.
Europe has to step up, Europe has to invest more in defense, and that is what we see is happening. So I welcome that after many years of cuts in defense spending, Europe is now increasing defense spending as a response to a more dangerous and more challenging security environment.
The great advantage of NATO over any other permutation is that it binds the United States and Canada to the security of Europe. Clearly, the power of the United States has an enormous weight in any calculation being made by a potential enemy. I don't think people like Mr. Putin will be shaking in their boots at the thought that President Juncker and Brussels might want to do something. He wants to know what's the United States going to do.
In the 13th century, Ghent, the Flemish city in Belgium, was bigger than Moscow. It was devastated during the 100 Years' War, and its global trading status was lost after the 80 Years' War. The North American phase of the Napoleonic Wars between Great Britain and the United States was ended here with the Treaty of Ghent and negotiated here and adopted on Christmas Eve 1814. Today, Britain and the United States account for 78.6% of NATO spending. That such an alliance is possible today would not have seemed possible in 1814. However, paying for the rising defence costs of the NATO alliance has long been problematic. According to PolitiFact, by NATO's count, total defence spending of all NATO members stood at about $900 billion in 2015. The United States share was about $650 billion. Do the math, and the percentage comes to about 72%. The NATO Secretary General said that if all countries met the 2% GDP target, $100 billion would be raised, which is equivalent to the combined budgets of the UK and France, Europe's largest defence spenders.
If you look at the figures, US is paying for NATO approximately 75% and all European countries altogether around 25%. And we all understand that it is not fair and it is also not sustainable.
Every United States president has said that they want the European partners, the European allies, to contribute more to defence. Trump is no exception in that. For the last 50 years, the United States has been trying to find ways of encouraging Europeans to share the burden of defence. And the fact is, a lot of countries don't pull their weight. I'm delighted now Poland meets the 2% objective. I hope other countries will come up to that as well. And don't forget, this is not money that's being given to NATO. This is 2% of GDP to be spent on national defence. We want our nations to strengthen their defence capabilities.
It's also about getting better value for money for our taxpayers, because the truth is that we spend a lot of money, but in uncoordinated, not efficient way. The kind of threats and challenges we face to our security and defense indeed require us to operate together as a union.
At a conference on the future of EU-NATO cooperation, Europe's High Representative Federica Mogherini presented her vision of the European Union's ongoing work on security and defence. She said that for the first time there is a joint EU-NATO agenda being implemented, and for the first time ever, Europe is moving towards a real European Union of security and defence. Mogherini advocates a European Union that can take responsibility for its own security. She acknowledged concerns about the future of NATO, but said she believes there is one safe pathway which preserves a healthy relationship between the two shores of the Atlantic, investing in cooperation at the international level, multilateralism and a rule-based world order. It's what she calls the EU global strategy.
Well, I think that the global strategy is very good theoretical material. But the key, of course, will be the implementation. And here, I guess, for the European Union's common foreign and security policy is how successful EU is and will be in our immediate neighborhood. East, south, and it will be very difficult to imagine that if the European Union is not successful in our immediate neighborhood, that we can play an important role somewhere else.
This week, the European Commission proposed a new European Defence Fund to support Member States' spending and joint defence capabilities to strengthen European security and to foster a competitive and innovative industrial base. The proposed European Defence Fund would include two windows which are complementary but different in their legal structure and budget sourcing. A research window to fund collaborative research in innovative defence technologies and a capability window which would act as a financial tool to reduce Member States' defence costs.
The project, which we have now partially concluded, started already 2014. The intention to find innovative ways to deepen European defence cooperation and especially to focus on investments. It was mentioned in the President Juncker's political guidelines, so this project has nothing to do with the American elections.
It is about being a global security provider. It is about having a strong, smart, innovative European industrial base. It is a way to deepen defence cooperation, making full use of all our instruments, combining them in a coherent manner.
I feel at this moment that we are trying to move in 4 or 5 different directions at the same time, and that's not entirely healthy. For example, we should specify what the joint military headquarters should be used for, and this is one of the big questions for which we do not yet have the answer from the Commission or the Council, for that matter. And there are other similar issues. Nevertheless, I believe that there should be a military capability which is strictly European Union, not just a NATO affiliate.
Article 5, the principle of collective defence, is at the very heart of NATO's founding treaty. It commits NATO members to protect each other and establishes a spirit of solidarity within the alliance.
I am quite sure that if President-elect Trump really will be in the White House, he will absolutely understand that the same principles of collective defense and the history of NATO and the future of NATO, they will be there, and collective defense is also very useful for the United States, especially if you also recall 9/11.
We have to see realities, and the realities are that we are dealing with a more and more aggressive Russia, and Europe will have to react if it comes to that.
Do you think that Article 5 would be enforced if Russia was to make an incursion into European territory?
It all depends on political will. If a member state raises that and invokes that article, and if the others indeed will answer the call.
The European Union, the 28 members, include neutral members. So invoking the mutual help article may cause a problem to some of them. So there are all these legal niceties in the background. But what I would be looking for is a European Union military capability with force projection. It's not primarily about defense, I believe, but about being capable of holding its own in the neighborhood.
Do you think Article 5 is really worth the paper it's written on today?
Presumably you're basing your remarks on remarks made by President-elect Trump during his campaign. I think a lot of people during campaign rhetoric say things which, on reflection, when he becomes President of the United States, the reality of the NATO alliance is fully clarified to him. Of course, Article 5 will be fully effective, but we need to make sure that certain people, like the Russians, understand that now, so that they're not tempted to do something silly between now and the new president bedding down.
And then there is the small issue of Montenegro, which has applied to join the European Union and NATO.
Österreich, Serbia,
Czarnogóra,
Chorvatska, Nihon, Italia,
Magyarország,
Kazakhstan, United States,
España,
Israel.
The International New York Times recently reported that a pro-Russian mercenary detained in Montenegro was providing an account of what the local authorities say were covert Russian efforts to seize Montenegro's parliament building in October, to kill the Prime Minister and to install a new government hostile to NATO. Conveniently, in April, President Obama had discussed the southern flank of NATO. He said that NATO is going to be working with the European Union to deal with the migrant crisis in cooperation with Turkey, Greece and other countries. NATO has already deployed ships in the Aegean Sea.
Are you comfortable with the idea that Europe can defend itself in the absence of US military assistance?
Certainly not against a nuclear power. That would be very difficult to understand how that could work. British and French nuclear capabilities are not geared directly towards that sort of a threat, especially if it is coming from the east. So the nuclear dimension is, I think, clearly still within the exclusive purview of NATO.
With the Trump administration, great damage has already been done to NATO. And it's about time that indeed European member states realize that they have to invest in European own capacities. If those capacities can also be put at the service of NATO, fine, but Europe must have them, and indeed we have them, but we're not used to train together under the EU CSTP. We need to do that. It's about time, and in a way Trump is making it even more urgent.
We have always said, you know, let's let the Americans do the dirty work, and we'll do the fine, you know, stitching afterwards. I don't know whether that is the right way for a continent of 500 million people. You know. On the other hand, we have military all over the place. I mean, we have particularly the Brits, the French, the Germans. So, do we need a European army, or should we just better coordinate those we already have?
We have actually tasks which are underpinned by international law, which might require substantial military engagement. Peace enforcement is such. If you want to put it that way, the first Gulf War was a peace enforcement mission. So I'm thinking about that size of a military capability should be ready and available for the EU.
Increasingly complex cyber threats have led to senior officials from NATO and the European Union meeting to discuss the next practical steps in NATO-EU cooperation on cyber defence. Earlier this year, NATO and the EU concluded a technical arrangement on cyber defence, which provides a framework for sharing best practices between NATO's computer incident response capability and the computer emergency response team of the European Union. These exercises are another area where NATO and the EU are working more closely together.
Do you think now Germany should really take the leadership in terms of driving a military agenda for Europe?
Like it or not, we live in a German Europe, and so Germany has to step up to its responsibilities. It's not just about reaping the economic benefits of being in the Union, it's also its political responsibilities, and yes, they include security and defense.
NATO's Secretary General said he looked forward to welcoming President-elect Trump to Brussels for the NATO summit next year to discuss the way forward with allied heads of state and government. Maybe, when President Trump visits Brussels, he can make his way to Ghent and tweet about the tremendous treaty of 1814 that really did make America great. The question now is whether NATO headquarters, based less than an hour from Ghent and 10 minutes from the European Commission, will hold as a centre of global influence, and whether NATO will make it to 80 years without a global war and the realignment of Europe's eastern borders.